the day, yeah, yeah, yeah. Understandable, you should invoice them.
Long but entertaining and explanatory intro. It also has a huge amount of voice acting, and the acting is actually pretty good. Well, at least for the main character. It's very hit or miss depending on who's talking, and this goes for the entire game. Some of it gives me like old school Star Wars movie vibes though. While it hasn't aged super well visually, it's still a treat to watch these cutscenes. Nowadays though, I'm not sure a game could get away with such a long intro. The whole game takes place in Hammerfell and the locales in the region of Hammerfell. After the intro, the game kinda just throws you directly into a fight without any explanation or controls guide, so you just kind of have to figure it out. As you can see, this game is exclusively a third-person action-adventure game, which is a pretty big departure from any of the earlier Elder Scrolls games. There's also no character creation. Instead, you play as a man named Cyrus, who returns to search for his missing sister. The gist of the story is that in his search for his sister, he gets involved in a really deep conflict in the region due to an ongoing war, which happened in the wake of the death of Hammerfell's High King. That's about as far as I understand it. Visually, in-game, this game has this early PS1 type look to me, almost kind of like Tomb Raider. I actually like how this game looks. It's got a lot of charm to it, and it's really nostalgic for me. While it's not a visual masterpiece by today's standards, it nailed the style they were going for. I do wish the frame rate for the animations were a bit higher though. It feels choppy, and while that doesn't break the game for me, it does constantly remind me of when this game came out. Speaking of style, this game also has great music. It's all MIDI music, as was the standard back in the day, but the arrangements are actually fantastic, and they evoke this sense of adventure and majesty that you really want to get out of a grand fantasy game like this. The gameplay itself is fairly basic, but it absolutely works for what it's trying to do. You can run around freely in a third-person view, but whenever you press the dedicated button to pull out your weapon, the camera angle changes and your movement is affected too. Now, don't get me wrong, it works, but if you're expecting an in-depth combat system or any significant gameplay growth, you're probably not gonna find it here in this game. The game lays its cards out on the table right at the beginning and is completely unapologetic about it. When you're out in the world, there's a bunch of AI to talk to, and each one has its own fully voiced conversation tree. For how old this game is, it has a ton of dialogue, and it's super nice to see something like that. I also really like this early kind of voice acting, where almost every character has this over-the-top delivery on their lines.
Spikes down, B.
It almost makes me feel like a kid again playing one of the games from my childhood. Oh, and
Last
the world
player
building in this
standing.
game is
One
crazy
enemy
deep
remaining.
for the kind of game it is. Like I mentioned a second ago, there's tons of dialogue and nearly everyone you talk to has a lot to say. At some points, you kind of just get lost in it. They even have these weirdly cinematic camera angles for the dialogue sequences. It's super charming. Also, I just wanted to point out something funny that happened. I, an idiot, immediately pulled out my sword right at the beginning of the game by accident because I didn't know the control button.
Clutch.
This provoked a nearby guard.
Good thing I was
unfortunately
with
had
you.
to kill it.
Yes.
I expected this to be a problem, but there were zero consequences at all. While this
Well
would normally
done,
get you in a
Silva.
ton of trouble
You
in a
truly
normal
are
Elder
a
Scrolls game,
hunter.
it looks like you can just kind of get away with
Reloading.
stuff like that in Redguard. So overall, I actually really like what I played of this game. It's fun, and while it's a bit basic compared to what I normally expect from an Elder Scrolls game, that doesn't mean anything bad in this case. The game is solid and it does what it's trying to do pretty well, and I'd recommend playing it if you're really interested in the Elder Scrolls. While in my opinion this doesn't feel like a normal Elder Scrolls game,
Eyes
it
on
does
target.
have a lot of the things that people look for in Elder Scrolls games. There's conversation systems with AI that are fully voiced and a few dialogue trees, but otherwise it's just a standard action adventure with very little of the role-playing you'd expect in a standard game. Of course, this is a spin-off, so there's definitely going to be some differences. It does play heavily into the Elder Scrolls
Shut
lore,
down.
which is its biggest strength in my eyes. Now, I need to point out that I
They're
wasn't
blind
really
fear.
able to get as far as I wanted into this game, but
Reloading.
not for lack of trying. The game actually, for some reason, started giving me errors and outright crashing
Enemy,
on me. In
defender
fact, I had to
spawn.
restart playing this game multiple times because my saves kept getting corrupted
catch
for no
them.
reason. I'm not sure why this was happening, but I'm thankful I at least got to get a few hours in. Also, before I move on, let me just say that if you're interested in the Elder Scrolls 6,
One
there's
enemy
a pretty
remaining.
good chance it'll be set in Hammerfell if this tweet is anything to go by. If anything, that's another good reason to check out this game.
We're done
Reloading.
here.
Elder Scrolls Travels Stormhold released in 2003 for mobile phones. This is the start of the Elder Scrolls Travel series, which are all smaller experiences made specifically for mobile devices. This game is a first-person dungeon crawler. Visually, it looks a lot like those old school
Did hit record, didn't I?
first-person
Yes, I did
dungeon
hit
crawlers
record.
you'd
Good
find
for
on
me.
DOS PCs. There's no sound or anything though, at least not in the version I'm playing. For the record, that is kind of an expectation from these kinds of Java mobile games, so I can't really complain too much. When you first start, you select your class and then you're on your way after a brief introduction. As for gameplay, you can talk to NPCs, equip gear, attack enemies with weapons and magic, and move around the areas freely.
Let's see if I
You
can
also
sweep around
camp
the
to
back.
recover your health and magic. There's a menu where you can look at your stats and mess with your skills and inventory too, but that's pretty much all there is to it. Interestingly, there's a shockingly high amount of dialogue in this game, which is something I didn't expect at all from a game like this. This game is incredibly simple though, and honestly, I imagine anyone playing this nowadays is only here for either the lore or out of pure
Damn it.
curiosity. I'm sure this game has its fans out there, but something like
Where
this
are you?
really can't hold my attention for too long. Also, I
Mark
checked out a long
Mark
play
3.
online and found that while there
Reloading.
is a bit of variety to the enemies down the line, the environments all
Reloading.
look pretty much identical to what you're seeing here.
Deploying drone.
The Elder Scrolls Travels Dawnstar, released in 2004, also for mobile phones. This game is nearly identical to Stormhold, both visually and gameplay-wise, but it is improved a little bit with more variety in the locations. The goal in this one is to reveal Dawnstar's strength.
Last
You can
player
actually do this
standing.
pretty much at any time, but if you get it wrong, it's game over. I've got to be honest, both this and Stormhold are weird for me. I feel bad not giving them more focus and time, but there's really not
If you're
very
not a
much
good
to
shot
these
today,
games. In just the
don't
short
worry.
amount
There
of
are
time
other
I've shown
ways
you
to be
this, you've
useful.
seen nearly everything these games have to offer, at least from what I can tell.
I have the spike. Alright.
Elder Scrolls Travels Shadowkey, released in 2004 for the N-Gage. The N-Gage was a weird cell phone, mobile game, console hybrid thing. I'm not gonna get super into what the N-Gage is right now, but just know that this thing was an interesting little device. Shadowkey is
Quick peeks now.
significantly different from the previous two games and actually feels closer to what you'd expect from an Elder Scrolls game, at least for something on a device like the N-Gage. Visually and gameplay-wise, it feels
Okay,
really
Jesus
fine
Christ.
and agile, which is actually an achievement given the hardware that it's running on. While there is a lot of area variety, the unfortunate downside is that you can't see
Get
more
out of
than
my
about
way.
5 feet in front of you due to the render distance. The world size is shockingly
Reloading.
large though, and while it's easy to get lost, it's still super impressive. So to get into some of the details here, when you start the game, you choose a class, a race,
Enemy
and a
spotted
gender.
B.
From there, you're dropped into the quest, and it just tells you to go. At certain checkpoints during quests, the game will give you descriptions of what's going on, D&D style. This is, again, very reminiscent of Daggerfall. It
Enemy
looks like
down.
they took a lot of cues from Daggerfall. Combat is fairly basic. You can swing swords and maces, use spells like fireballs, and fire arrows from a bow. Arrows aren't a consumable item in this game, so your bow just seems to have infinite arrows. Unfortunately, when I tried the bow, it was almost entirely useless. That or I just wasn't spec'd for a
Scanning
bow.
ahead.
Sometimes when you defeat enemies, you can loot their bodies. Unfortunately, you usually can only loot gold
You
and
will
sometimes
not
healing
kill
items
my
from them.
allies!
Once you defeat enough enemies and gain enough experience, you can level up, which allows you to increase one of your stats by 1 point. There's a lockpicking mechanic too, but it seems to be just kind of like a random chance kind of thing.
One
As you
enemy
explore the
remaining.
world, you
My
can talk
ult
to
is ready.
NPCs, and some of them will give you
No one
quests.
escapes
Their
my
dialogue
sight.
can also change depending
No
on
one.
your active quest. The game doesn't have a ton of depth, but it
Act
doesn't
on my
really need
intel.
to, since it's
Don't
meant to
give
be a
them
game
time
that you
to
can play on the
reposition.
go. It does what it sets out to do actually super well. So I'm gonna be honest, I didn't expect much out of this game at all, but what they made here is actually something really special. It honestly feels like a successor to Daggerfall. Once you figure out its little quirks, Shadowkey is a brilliant little game that has more depth than you would expect on the surface. I definitely plan to come back and play more of Shadowkey at some point. I do hope that someday someone with some talent can breathe new life into it like they have with Daggerfall Unity, because this game is actually pretty difficult to
Dropping
set
the
up
spike.
and play without having an actual end game
Revealing
in front
area.
of you.
Where are
The
you?
Elder Scrolls Travels
There they
of
are.
Oblivion
Mark
was
one.
released in 2006 for mobile
Oi,
phones. It's a
after
weird side
hunter.
version of Oblivion that I don't see a whole lot of people talk about usually. So this game is an isometric adventure game. It seems to very loosely follow the story of Oblivion, but in this case your character has their own personality and dialogue.
Silence.
In fact, they're a little bit snarky if I'm being honest. For example, you have no choice but to watch as they refuse to help Joffrey without being paid. So this game is actually pretty challenging, at least right at the beginning, because it seems like everything poisons you and just hits you really hard. Fortunately, death seems to have no consequence whatsoever, because when you respawn, you retain everything, and any enemies you defeated don't respawn with you. Eventually, you can just kind of start mashing the attack button and killing everything without taking much damage. This is pretty much the most effective way to play the game. Just mash the attack key to hit things. Also, your health regenerates over time, so if you manage to survive a tough encounter, you can just sit idle while your health regenerates. Oh, and enemies
One
also
enemy
sometimes
remaining.
attack you from off-screen, making the attack impossible to avoid. When you defeat enemies, you gain experience, and they sometimes also drop loot. Of course, there's an inventory where you can mess with your equipment, items, and spells. Sadly, your character doesn't change appearance at all, regardless of your gear and weapons, but I didn't really expect that from a game like this anyways. The game is broken up into these discrete locations, and if you want to save your game or buy things with your gold, you have to do it during a scene transition. It's kind of weird, but I'm assuming it's a limitation of the hardware. There's also pretty nice variety of locations though, especially for this kind of game. I think the isometric view, even if it's a little bit janky, works much better than a first-person view for this kind of game. Also, there's this awful control scheme issue where you can't really run properly without just mashing the run buttons. Fortunately, another YouTuber called Weasel has completely fixed the problem by modifying the game, so thank you for that. I'll link their channel in the
Revealing
description.
area.
My overall impressions of this game is that while it is significantly better in my opinion than Stormhold and Dawnstar, it's not really something I think I'd come back to play. It mostly seems to be retreading Oblivion itself, just from a slightly different perspective. At least Dawnstar and Stormhold were original stories. That being said, if
Defeated.
you're a big Elder Scrolls fan and you're curious,
Bring
it's
them
not
down.
too hard to set this
Enemy,
game up and get it
defender
working.
spawn. We found one.
I bet you weren't expecting this one. So Oblivion actually was going to get another version for the PSP, also called The Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion, but it got canceled in the middle of development. What's interesting though is that builds of the unfinished game are obtainable, and I want to show you what this
Spike
game
down
could
B.
have been. Now, let me make it clear that this is absolutely not a full game. It's closer to a tech demo than it is a full
One
game,
enemy
but there are
remaining.
still some really interesting things to look at here. So the main menu has a couple of options. There's a start button and a test button. Clicking start puts you into what looks like the beginning of a story campaign. You start out in a jail cell that's similar to the one that you start out in the actual full Oblivion game, but it kind of just throws you right
I have
into the
the
thick of
spike.
it here. The controls actually really work once you get the hang of them. The analog stick
Caution
moves your
here.
character,
30
the
seconds
X button
left.
uses your weapon, triangle jumps, square guards, and
Last
circle
player
uses your equipped
standing.
spell. Holding down the R
Spike
button allows you
down
to look
B.
around freely, and holding down L allows you to strafe back and forth and lock onto enemies. Holding down R and hitting the jump button also lets you crouch. The D-pad is a quick menu that lets you equip
Do you
and
want to
unequip spells and
dance?
weapons. The select button opens up the menu, which is super reminiscent of the menu you'd find in the standard Oblivion game. Unfortunately, a couple of the menus aren't fully implemented, but
I'm
it's
getting
still
up.
very functional. The combat in this is super basic, but still very reminiscent of Oblivion. take that how you will. There's spells, standard short swords, and even a bow and arrow implemented. There's also experience and skill gain and even a full level up screen. I do like how there's a super detailed explanation for strength, but the others just say stuff like, speed is great. Unfortunately, progressing far enough into this main story segment just crashes the game. I assume because there's nothing beyond the door you try to go through. Hitting the start button opens up a menu that shows you a list of demo warps that you can jump to. Unfortunately, selecting any of these leads to a hard freeze. However, it does seem like you can access all of these through the title screen menus. One of the areas you can access is a big hub area with plenty of NPCs to talk to. Talking to them kinda sorta gives you an idea of what the story was gonna be about, at least from what I can tell. It looks like the game was gonna start out with an invasion of the city you're in, only for you to help fight it off. Something I do like is how if you jump off the side in the hub area, you die and the game gives you a fun Monty Python reference. Another area you can visit are Oblivion Gate style areas. These are kinda similar to how you see them in the normal Oblivion game, albeit a little bit simplified. This game honestly had a ton of potential, and I really wish they had been able to turn it into a full product. It looked like it was going to have its own story set in Cyrodiil while maintaining the look and feel of Oblivion. The foundation is there, and it's unfortunate that it was cancelled. I think had it been able to complete development, it could have been a gem, and I'm sure people would look back on it fondly. Alright, this is the one a lot of you are here for.
One
This
enemy
is the
remaining.
most requested game from my first Elder Scrolls. The Elder Scrolls Online released for PC and Mac in 2014, with console versions following in 2015. Online is,
What do you
well,
say, Droll?
online. It's an
Ready to stretch your
MMORPG
wings?
set in the entire world of Tamriel. So before I get into this one, let me explain why I'm calling this game a spin-off. This game was developed by a different team than the team that's in charge of developing the main numbered Elder Scrolls games. And while this game is pretty beefy in its own right and has a ton of content, it's not a main numbered entry. That was my reasoning for not getting it into the last video. That being said, let's dig into it now. Also, for the record, I don't own any DLC for this game beyond what's provided with the Steam version. I did play the beta back in the day though, so I do have an additional pet monkey named Raisins right off the bat, so do I even need DLC? The game begins with the character creator. This one's a bit different though, because you're given the option to choose an alliance, which comes into play later on. Three options are the Daggerfall Covenant, the Aldmeri Dominion, and the Ebonheart Pact. You can also choose a race, though for me, I couldn't choose Imperial since I would have needed to unlock it in the store. The classes here are a bit different from the norm too. You can choose from Dragon Knight, Sorcerer, Nightblade, Templar, Warden, and a locked one, which is Necromancer. Once you've created your character, you're on your way. After a tutorial segment, you're able to then choose where you want to start. There's a few options here, though some of them are locked. The starting location also seems to let you choose which storyline you want to play first. I chose Bleak Rock Isle since it seems to be at least a bit Skyrim adjacent, and Skyrim is my bread and butter.
Last player
You can go pretty much
standing.
anywhere you want at any time, though. As far as visuals go, this game really nails the aesthetic it's going for. It's a beautiful game in my opinion. While this game is pushing a decade at this point, it still looks excellent thanks to a plethora of diverse environments and some pretty great texture work. Nothing looks especially low res unless you're standing like an inch away from it. The gameplay of this is super reminiscent of the last couple of mainline Elder Scrolls games, but that's just on the surface. For starters, you can change between first and third person. Exploration also looks a lot like it does in Skyrim, with the compass at the top of your screen showing you both quest markers and nearby named locations. Combat also on the surface works pretty similarly to the last couple of mainline games, albeit with a few more significant changes. Enemies can now crowd control you for starters, which is something that you have to use a button combination to escape. You have your standard sword or other melee swings and charge attacks, along with being able to shield and shield bash. But the way movement, magic, and skills work is very different. Enemies in this game now have area of effect moves that you can actually see the range of MMO style. What I mean by this is that when an enemy is going to use an AoE attack, you can see the cone or circle in red, sort of like other MMOs. A good way to avoid these is using the dodge, which works in any direction by double tapping one of the movement buttons, at least on PC. While I prefer playing this game in first person, there are definitely times where it makes way more sense to fight in third person because of this. In fact, I'd imagine high-level players probably prefer to play in third person exclusively. All of your skills and magic are now mapped to different keys, similar to how you'd see them work in other MMOs. You press the key when you want to use the ability, and the ability is usually only usable at certain ranges. You also now have something called an ultimate. These are similar to your standard skills, but these have to charge over time and have a really long cooldown. However, the trade-off is that these skills tend to be significantly more powerful than the standard.
Last player
Skills
standing.
and spells by leveling up. At least that's how you unlock them for the class I chose. Leveling up works pretty simply. You're given a set
One
number of
enemy
leveling
remaining.
up and usually
Clutch.
rewards for each level. The points you get go into increasing your magicka, health, and stamina. followed by adding abilities.
Pry open
Abilities
their
are sort
minds.
of like
Find
perks in
the
the other games,
weakness.
but these are outright abilities you can use in and sometimes out of combat. You can also
I'm
use your
gearing
skill
up.
points on things like armor, crafting, and weapons. You can unlock these skill trees by equipping and using these items or harvesting crafting materials. It's mainly stuff like passive buffs or a per armor piece buff when you invest in a skill point like that though. Depending on your build, there's a skills advisor on the left that gives you suggestions on what to unlock. Once you've unlocked an ability, you can level it up and eventually morph it by using more skill points on it. For example, there's an ability I have called Lava Whip, and after reaching level 4, I was able to morph it into either
Scanning
Flame
ahead.
Lash or Molten Whip. My skill advisor said to change it to Flame Lash, which is a more powerful version of the skill with an extra effect. Also, before I forget, archery in this game is not like the normal games. While you do have an infinite supply of arrows, you have a very limited range before your arrows actually do anything. That means that
Spike
no,
down
you
A.
cannot be a sneak archer in this game. At least I wasn't able to be a sneak archer. NPC interactions are somewhat similar yet distinctly
You want to
different
play?
how they've been in
Let's
the main
play.
Elder Scrolls games. You can talk to many
Bless
NPCs,
you, I think.
quest givers and some flavor NPCs. You can
Oh, crazy.
NPCs. Pickpocketing works about the same as it would in the mainline games, albeit you now see your odds to
Last
succeed
player
right on the
standing.
My ult is
pickpocket
ready.
prompt.
Spike
If you do
down,
successfully
mid.
pickpocket someone, the item you stole can't be stored in the bank, nor can it be sold to any NPC that isn't a fence. If you fail at pickpocketing or are caught committing another crime, a bounty is put on your head and any guards who see you will attempt to kill you. You cannot damage the guards, so the only option is to either escape
You
or
will
face your
not
death.
kill my
Speaking of death,
allies.
when you die in this game, you have the option to either respawn where you
Where
died
are
using
you?
a soul gem or respawn
Mark
at
two.
a way shrine. There's also a
30
penalty to
seconds
your
left.
equipped item durability, meaning you'll have to go repair them sooner. Speaking of, there's crafting and repairing and all that kind of stuff in this game too. The kinds of crafting include blacksmithing, woodworking, and alchemy. They work about as you'd expect. Assuming you have the recipes and the proper item requirements, you can craft and upgrade items
Last
as you
round
see fit.
in the
Also,
half.
crafting items in this game
Spend those
requires you to
credits
pick a
before we lose
style.
them.
The styles are broken down by race, and you can learn other styles by reading these racial motif books. You also need style materials, which can be found around the world or bought from a merchant. Once you have the required learned style and the style's required materials, in a Nord's case, corundum, you can craft the item. Since I'm a Nord and I know the Nord style, I can craft a Nord style maple bow right off the bat. Creating items and deconstructing items back into materials upgrades your crafting stat in that specialty, allowing you to craft more items and learn more blueprints.
Revealing
As far as
area.
inventory goes, this game doesn't use a weight like the
find you.
normal games. Instead, you have a finite amount of inventory space. Managing inventory is straightforward, though the super annoying inventory cap makes it
We'll
nearly
catch them.
impossible to play this game like the normal mainline games, since you can't just steal everything in sight and just deal with the encumbrance. In fact, I spent a ton of time
Reloading.
playing this just trying to clear out inventory space because the hard limit is so annoying. There are these banks that you can visit in the cities that will house your items, though these banks also have a limited number of space. You can pay in-game currency to increase the space by 10 slots at a time, or, of course, you can
Multiple
also make the
enemies A.
inventory management a little easier.
One
by paying
enemy
for the
remaining.
in-game service. But I'll get into that a little later. Equipping weapons and gear is super easy, and hovering over your gear shows you a comparison of it versus what you already have equipped. Also, if you drop items in this game, those items are just destroyed and lost forever. You unfortunately cannot create a massive pile of garbage. Lockpicking in this game works a little bit differently to how we've seen it before, but has the same concepts.
Switching
Here, you have to press
sides.
down on the tumblers until you see them shake a bit, then let go at the right time, locking them into place. You do these one at a time until the lock is open. You can also attempt to force the lock, and you can see the percentage chance of it working at the bottom. Oh, and you can also attempt to lockpick NPC houses and businesses too, but if you're caught, that's a crime. Obviously, since this is an MMORPG, there are a ton of things that you can do to interact with other players outside of just seeing them running around the world with you. You can party up for starters, but there's also stuff like PvP, trading, and guilds that you can join. In order to join a guild, you can either be invited by another player or you can use the guild finder. Once you find a guild you want to join, you submit an application and wait to see if you're accepted. Some guilds want players with specific playstyles, but
find
you
them.
can sort the guilds by what kind of guild they are in the guild finder. Another exclusive feature to this game, thanks to the power of
I'll find
MMOs,
you.
is campaigns. Campaigns are these
Mark
PvP
three.
Scanning
quest
ahead.
type things that take place in Cyrodiil over pretty long periods of time. You choose a home
Spike
campaign
down,
and fight for
B.
your alliance. You can access these from a special menu once you hit the required level, and then you can queue up for whatever campaign you chose. These campaigns allow players from all alliances alliances to congregate and battle each other. When you're in a campaign, the gameplay does change up a little bit. The goal is to try to control areas
One
with
enemy
your alliance
remaining.
by taking specific points across Cyrodiil. You can help the campaign as much
Enemy
as you want
spotted
during the
B.
duration, but you can also leave Cyrodiil the quest normally at any time if you want. I need to talk about regular questing here, outside of the multiplayer PvP stuff.
Why are
So
they so
normally in
determined to
MMOs,
die?
you go from NPC to progress the story, and the only way to really push these quests forward is to mundanely go from task to task. In this game, however, sometimes quests will just fall in your lap, or you'll run into one. There was one quest that started in Daggerfall from a dog just randomly appearing and leading me to a dead body. That quest turned into a whole assassination conspiracy. Stuff like that doesn't really happen in other MMOs in my experience. It's just another one of the ways that the Elder Scrolls DNA finds its way into this game, and it's something I really enjoy. Another thing that I really enjoy in this game is the game's sense of exploration. Yeah, you can go from quest to quest and beeline from place to place, but there's also tons of stuff in the world that you would have never been able to find otherwise. All you have to do is just explore a bit. You're rewarded for going off the beaten path. There's NPCs, treasures, locations, and even entire dungeons you may never have seen if you didn't explore. Getting around is fairly easy.
I feel like I give this one a...
discoverable way shrines that you're free to travel between. Though if you attempt to fast travel to a way shrine without already being at one, it does cost you some in-game money. It also punishes you if you spam traveling to way shrines. So another thing I wanted to point out is how much this game embraces community add-ons. I've played a fair
One
bit of
enemy
Final Fantasy
remaining.
14, and if you're using add-ons with that game, it's more of an open secret kind of
Reloading.
situation, and it's technically
Spike
against the
spotted
rules.
mid.
In the Elder Scrolls Online, though, there's an entire add-ons menu right on the title screen. Installing them is even super easy.
I'm
I
getting up.
installed a minimap add-on because, well, why not? Now I need to talk about the premium membership. So this game has an upfront cost, but after that, you're free to play as much as you want. You can also buy any of the expansions outright and play them too. However, when this game first came out, there was a monthly fee you had to pay in order to play. Nowadays, though, they've replaced that with an optional subscription called ESO Plus. ESO Plus has a variety of benefits, including access to all of the DLC, a golden EXP bonus, a premium currency allowance, more bank space, and a few other things. While I didn't purchase this subscription for this video cause I'm broke, I do think that I will when I eventually return to this game. Access to all the DLC alone makes it seem worth the price, and this game is definitely a game I plan to come back and play more of on my own time. So overall, my feelings on the Elder Scroll Online are really positive. While it doesn't retain everything I like from a normal mainline Elder Scrolls game,
Spike
mainly
planted.
the ability to just hoard everything in sight, it does have the DNA of Elder Scrolls ingrained throughout it. The combat is fun and engaging, the environments are just as fun to explore as they are in the mainline games, and there's just a ton of stuff to do, an overwhelming amount of stuff to do. I didn't even come close to touching on everything you can do in this game, like fishing, player housing and customization, and a bunch more stuff. Because
One
if I did,
enemy
this
remaining.
video would probably be 5 times longer, and I probably wouldn't be able to put it out for another month or two. All in all, if you like the Elder Scrolls, play this game. I promise you'll like it. The Elder Scrolls Legends is about as spin-off as you can get. Released in 2017 for PC and mobile, this game is actually a free-to-play
failed. Now
collectible
flee.
card game. When you first start this game, you get a short
Reloading.
introductory cutscene followed by a screen where you can choose your
Reloading.
avatar.
Remember,
This isn't
your
a permanent
weapon is
choice and
only
really
a
just
tool.
is a
You can't
representation
just
of your online
shoot.
profile that
You
you
have
can
to
change
think.
later. From there, you're put into another cutscene where the implication is that you're in an arena fight. So this game, as I said, is a card game. Fortunately, though, the rules aren't too complicated. The gist of it is this. You use Magicka to summon cards. Every card has a cost associated and can be summoned into one of 2 lanes. Some cards aren't summons at all, though, and are instead standard effect cards. Every card has an attack stat and a health stat, and both players on the playing field have a set amount of health themselves. The goal is to take your opponent's HP down to 0.
Where
when you
are
have a
you?
card on the field, you can use it to either hurt an opponent's
Enemy
card if
spotted
you're
mid.
able, or attack the opponent's HP directly if they don't have a guard up. It's kind of a risk
Reloading.
versus reward sort of thing. If you attack an opponent's card with your card and the opponent has the same attack or higher, you lose your own card in the process regardless of the opponent card's remaining HP. To go into a little bit more detail of how the game works, let me explain some things. If you start second in the game, you do get a little bonus, which is a 3-use ring of Magicka that you can use at any time to boost your Magicka pool by 1. Every time you lose 5 health, you lose one of your runes and you get to draw an additional card. If you draw a card called a Prophecy card upon losing a rune, you can instantly play it even if it's not your turn. There are 2 lanes you can summon your cards into, the Field Lane and the Shadow Lane. The Field Lane is a standard lane with no extra
Get out of
rules.
my
The
way!
Shadow Lane is special in that your summon cards
Last
can't be
player
attacked for
standing.
1 full turn after you summon them there. You can only have up to
Got
4
one.
cards in each lane. Trying to summon additional cards requires you to sacrifice one of your cards that you have in play already. Some cards have special effects when you summon them, like Valorant Vod Huntsman, who instantly deals 1 damage upon his summon. Other cards are just effects, like Valorant Ambusher, which deals 1 damage to all creatures in the lane that you choose. Some other cards, which I mentioned earlier, called guards, force your opponent to attack them before they can attack anything else in that lane or the opponent's health directly. This is a good way to buy yourself some time to strategize against your opponent's setup if you're having trouble in one of the lanes, or you can just use it to deny an enemy
Level
strong
heads
cards.
until we're
Finally,
home,
there's
yes?
support cards. These are usually buffs that are played in a separate area below your lanes. Divine Fervor, for example, is a support card that increases your creature's attacks and HP by 1. There are other types of cards, but I'd end up sitting here all day explaining them, and I do want to talk about some of the other stuff this game has to offer. The game has 3 main modes: solo play, versus
Reloading.
play, and quick play. Of course, there's also stuff like your card collection and deck editing too. In solo play, there's stories, which is the game's story mode, practice, which allows you to test your deck compositions, puzzles, which are fun little challenges, and solo arena, which I'll explain in a little bit. Your collection is where you can edit your decks and view your cards. Editing is straightforward enough, however, you can also use soul
Revealing
gems to
area.
create the cards that you don't have. To get soul gems, you can either earn them through means like leveling up or destroying unwanted cards. Stories has multiple adventures, all with different storylines. The default story is called The Forgotten Hero, which is the one the intro of the game is based on. The others are called Isle of Madness, The Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, and Return to Clockwork City. Unfortunately, the adventures outside of The Forgotten Hero are locked behind purchases. You can buy them either by act or the entire story as a bundle, but there doesn't seem to be any way to actually bulk buy all of the adventures together. The story mode in general isn't super deep on lore, at least not at first. There is an overarching story that unfolds as you get enemies in these duels, though. I also saw this fun little part where it let me choose to spare or execute this enemy, which allowed me to choose between 2 cards. Oh, and in this mode, there's also tons of really nice voice acting, and it gives a lot of character to the NPCs that you only normally see in illustrations. Speaking of illustrations, the card art in this game is fantastic. All of the cards are pretty much just beautiful paintings, and the art direction is top. Moving on, the puzzles in the solo mode are similar to the adventures in that you're given access to the first set for free, but the rest are locked behind purchases. These puzzles are mainly just fun mental exercise challenges where you're given a specific condition to win. For example, in this first puzzle, you have to somehow win in the first turn that you start. In these kinds of puzzles, there's usually only one solution, meaning that if you mess up, you have to restart. I like stuff like this. There's similar challenges in some of the Yu-Gi-Oh games that I've played, and I think it's a cool way to force players to think creatively. It also has the side effect of teaching players strategies they may not have otherwise considered. The arena is a special mode where you have to either use your accrued gold from playing other modes or an arena ticket to enter. The mode has you essentially fight as many opponents as you can before you lose 3 times. In the arena, you don't use your standard decks. Starting the arena asks you to choose one of 3 classes. Then, you add 30 cards from the random draft into your arena deck. From there, you face 9 enemies and then a boss. If you lose 3 times, you're out. Unfortunately, I'm terrible at this game apparently, and immediately lost I couldn't really tell you what happens when you win. Finally, for the battle modes, there's the multiplayer modes. There's casual, ranked, and versus arena, which I imagine is like an online version of the standard arena. I didn't really get to try it. I tried a casual versus match, and it pretty much plays identically to the standard game, just online against another player. Also, Lord Lou, if you're watching this, why did you let me win right at the end of it? You absolutely had
I
to.
know
You could have ended me
exactly
right
where
there,
you
but for some
are.
reason, you chose to attack my creature instead of my HP directly. Was it an act of mercy? Of pity? Was it because it was opposite day? Well, I'll have you know that it was actually reverse opposite day when you battled me. That means that my win is set in stone, and I now have a 100% Elder Scrolls Legends online win rate. That's 100%.
Last player
So
standing.
overall, the Elder Scrolls Legends is a pretty decent game if you're really into card games. It's also one of those games where you have to play it quite a bit to build up not only a deck that can really do some damage, but also learn the strategies
Everyone
and
note
metas
down your
required to be
observations,
competitive.
then
I
let's
can't
run it
really
again.
say that I'll come back to this with confidence, though. It's a good game, but I'm more of a Yu-Gi-Oh kind of guy. All in all, if you like competitive card games, you'll probably like this game. The Elder Scrolls Blades is a free-to-play spin-off released for mobile and the Nintendo Switch in 2020. I'm playing the Switch version for this video. This game is kind of a dungeon crawler, kind of a city builder. The game works on a questing system. Your base of operations is a small town that's the hub area, and your whole goal is to help rebuild the city however you see fit using materials that you gain from questing. When you begin, every area of the hub is a destroyed building. You can build a building of your choice in each spot in the hub. These buildings include shops like the blacksmith and houses to increase your population. population. Building these requires money, resources, and most importantly, time. The more you build, the more all of these requirements increase. However, here's where the free-to-play monetization element kicks in. If you don't want to wait for a building to finish building, you can use gems to instantly complete it. Gems are the premium currency in this game, and while you can earn gems through gameplay, it's much faster just to buy them with real money. The reward for this is increasing your town's prestige points, which in turn increases the town's level. At higher levels, you can build more structures and better quality improvements for your existing structures. Unfortunately, the amount of time it takes to build buildings increases to pretty
One
ridiculous
enemy
lengths
remaining.
pretty early on, which makes this game a complete time sink if you don't want to spend real money. Combat here definitely leaves something to be desired depending on who you ask, but it's serviceable and could be worse. Rather than a free-form battle system, you engage enemies in one-on-one brawls
Ears
where you
still
attack by
ringing.
holding down the left or right trigger. The enemies even patiently wait in line for you. If you time the hits right, you can hit a critical hit, and alternating your attacks left and right creates combo attacks. If you hold the analog stick forward, you can block enemy attacks. If you hit an enemy while they're blocking, you have to endure a short stun where you can't take any actions yourself. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no archery or long-range fighting in this game. All encounters are close up. There's also no stealth at all either. Weirdly though, the combat did start to kind of grow on me over time. I don't know if it's because the encounters were so short and streamlined or because I was just getting used to it. Spells and other special abilities are mapped to the face buttons and can be used as long as they're not on cooldown and as long as you have enough magicka or stamina. Every enemy has an indicator of their weakness under their health bar, but these indicators are only useful after you've encountered the enemy. The weaknesses include
You will
slashing,
not
bashing,
kill
and
my
cleaving,
allies.
along with different kinds of elemental weaknesses. Visually, this game looks almost like a mix of Skyrim, but with a bit more of a stylized mode. In all honesty though, it actually looks really good. It's not cutting edge or anything, but the art style absolutely invokes Elder Scrolls, and mixed in with the sound effects and fantastic music, it feels like Elder
Spike
Scrolls.
planted.
Speaking of, the soundtrack is super good, way better than you'd normally expect for a free-to-play game like this. It's pretty light and airy in a way, but it hits hard when it needs to. There's also voice acting, but it's not full voice acting. Characters usually say their first line or two, and then it's just text only. Sometimes there's other voice lines, but they're just kind of randomly inserted into the otherwise silent dialogue. The intro to this game is actually fully interactive, which is not something I expected. It immediately puts you in this tutorial-like starting area. From there, you create your character. The character creator has a lot of options, but
Where
it doesn't
are
really have any of the morphing or shaping like big
When your friend is toxic but has a basement, is that Attack on Titan?
with, and they increase in number as you upgrade your town and build more structures. The actual
Yeah.
dialogue
Last
is
player
written too,
standing.
so
When you pay too much for concert
there's no
tickets.
real
I actually don't know.
conversations or karma or
Ah.
anything, just standard NPC dialogue back and forth.
Baking, but make it a little sad and dramatic.
If you have the buildings for it. For example, at the
Ah.
buy and sell weapons and
One
armor
kid
and
that's from
sell
school will
crafting
eat anything.
materials. Unfortunately,
Ah.
we only have a limited amount of
Stranger danger, but it actually works. Oh, I'm
This
playing.
amount can be increased by upgrading the vendor's shop building. Crafting uses money and crafting materials, but as you can probably guess, also has a timer involved. Also, while
Oh, I
thinking
haven't
about it,
read
you
all
have a
these.
finite amount of
Bamboozling
inventory space.
myself.
This too can be expanded with gems, the premium currency. When you want to begin
I
a
think
quest,
it's
you can go to
fun,
the menu and do the quest
but
tab. You
also
can
I
unlock
think
more
it's a
quests
bit
by
too
talking to the
meaty.
NPCs around town or visiting
I
the
think
job
so, I
board
can see
like
your
Like,
logic.
I couldn't even guess the ones I
The quest
knew.
locations have a
Yeah.
limited amount of
Because
variety.
they're actually
Stone
not what
dungeons and
any of
wide
the things
forests
are
and
about.
abandoned
Yeah.
villages. Sometimes you even find little villages. The areas aren't wide
Like,
open
calling
or
these
anything,
stores
but they're still
basically
pretty
a
safe.
High School
Like
Musical
growing. That
AU
being said,
makes
don't
no
expect
sense.
the quest
No, I
to
think
be
you're-
Because
the
it's
mainline entry.
drama, isn't it? It's not singing.
No, it's not singing at all.
You're just kind of moving from
It's actually quite a lot of action in it.
Yeah, so I think like it's not a good recommendation from a library to present them that way.
Well, you're just presenting them incorrectly is kind of the main
Yeah,
problem.
like you could obviously make funny jokes, but like the basement in Attack on Titan doesn't come in until like season 3
One
or
enemy
4.
remaining.
No, I don't think
So
so.
it's not relevant to getting someone to read the first volume.
No, they're in jokes, and this
Yeah.
is thing. This is interesting.
Match
People on TikTok don't know the difference between their in jokes and jokes that will make other people laugh.
Yeah, like none of those would really engage me into reading those books because they're actually presenting all of them as comedies.
Which they're not a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what was Baking but Traumatic? Doesn't make me want to read that one in particular, which seems like quite a cute one with some like darker elements.
Yeah.
Oh my god, read the conversation from James.
Also, like when your best friend is toxic but has a
You
basement,
want to play?
that
Let's
is not
play.
an experience I relate.
No. Does not make sense.
Multiple enemies meet. Here comes the party. Multiple
Interesting.
I feel like
Spike down A.
He's comparing Final Fantasy to this because there's a long build up to a perceived gameplay.
Bring them down.
Whereas in both games, the gameplay starts immediately. But in this one, the gameplay leads to nothing, and that one, the gameplay leads to, I guess, still kind of more of the same, but at least it's a different story. It's like, this feels like reading the same paragraph over and over again with different font changes. He's like, oh, but they're so different. It's like, not really. Everyone plays the exact same in this game. Maybe at the high levels, your class really matters. But at these levels, everyone plays the game exactly the same, regardless of class. Oh, this one's control. This one does this. Really? I'm so salty about this, I'm sorry. You can tell me if I'm being too salty. I also just like the, you gotta work hard for the game. It's like, yeah, I know, but my god. So, enjoy peeing.
Contain extra loot, and the game tells you when you found one. Sometimes
One
you'll find
enemy
your
remaining.
This game's going for 40 minutes, by the way.
levers that open doors and gates, and these chests that give you a bunch of
got
items.
to be kidding
Otherwise,
me.
you can't really interact with much. There's also this thing called clairvoyance that gives you a sight line toward your quest objective, but it can be turned off if you want. Once you complete a quest, you receive any quest rewards, and
One
then you
dream
can either
ends,
return to the hub
another
area or
begins.
explore the area more to find anything that you missed. At any time, you can open up the menu and mess with your gear, or if the option is available, level up your stats and perks. I do like how you can inspect every piece of gear like a normal modern Elder Scrolls game, including the ability to rotate the model. Leveling up increases your stats and sometimes gives you items. You also receive 1 point that you can put into a spell, perk, or ability on a tree. Another progression system in this game is challenges. These are little achievements that you can unlock that give you rewards in the form of money and gems. After you claim a challenge, you have to wait for a timer to get a new one. You can also choose to outright cancel the
Revealing area.
challenges that you don't want to do. I mentioned this
Shot
earlier, but there's a few other kinds of quests that you can do, and the first are called jobs, which can be found at the job board in the hub area. These are time-limited quests that change every day and have specific rewards. When accepting these kind of quests, you can see the requirements and also the recommended level. These play out like any other quest, but you know exactly what you're getting for completing them. I imagine they also probably have more variety at higher levels. Another kind is the Abyss, which is a big, endless dungeon that you can explore, and as you progress, it gets harder and harder. In the Abyss, you only get experience and rewards when you clear a level. Once you descend a floor, you can't return to the previous one.
Last
If you
player
lose in
standing.
the Abyss, you can return to your most recent level you were able to complete. So, since this is a free-to-play game, there is a premium store. The store has a bunch of stuff, including decorations, emotes, and,
Somebody
of course, chests.
Spike
While
planted.
You don't have to spend any money on anything in this game, buying gems can increase your rate of progression pretty significantly. There's also a couple of other modes here that are more multiplayer-centric. The first is
My
guilds.
quiver is
Guilds
never
are,
full.
well, guilds. You can create your own or join someone else's with up to 20 players. In guilds, you can request items, chat with other guildmates, and even visit your guildmates' towns. In their towns, you can buy from their shops, which, depending on how far along you are, might be more well-equipped. The other is the arena. Here, you can straight up battle other players online. I was actually surprised to see this, and it works pretty well thanks to the simple and streamlined combat. Also, Meister Fu, the game said you won, but this was actually a different day from when I was playing the Elder Scrolls Legends, and it was actually opposite
dark.
day, so I actually won. Sorry, but that's
Scanning ahead.
showbiz, baby! Overall, I actually kind of like this game, which I was not expecting at all. I know people love to hate on this game, and honestly, they're justified for a variety of reasons, especially based on the game's launch. That being said, it's got some solid stuff in it, and I think it definitely works as a modern version of the other Travels games that I played earlier in this video, at least as far as dungeon crawling is concerned. Now, of course, going into this, you can't expect standard Elder Scrolls gameplay. There's no archery, no sneaking, and no emergent gameplay. That being said, the dungeon crawling is pretty solid. Of course, my biggest complaint about this game is gonna be the obvious one. It's a free-to-play game with free-to-play mechanics. The paywalls that exist are artificial progress blockers. That is to be expected since the game is free, but I do wish games like this had an optional purchase that lets you buy all the content outright, because this game is honestly solid in its current state. And for the record, I say its current state because when it first came out, it was a lot more rough with way more aggressive monetization.
are you?
Now it just pastures you randomly to remind you that you should spend money
Initiated.
on some gems. Either way, it's a lovely...
I'm only gonna do one round now. I can't.
Spike planted.
Whew.
I want me to plug my phone in soon. When do you want to go out?
Now I've officially played every single
little.
Elder Scrolls.
Yeah, it's been little. We could leave at like 3:30, give ourselves an hour,
This game is good for its own
and then
reasons.
dick around a little bit.
To spend a lot of people take some of these smaller games for granted or just don't know they exist, but they all add.
This video kind of made me want to play Elder Scrolls Online. I like MMOs, they're fun. I think people complain about them for like the time sinky elements, but like, it always feels like you're progressing in Elder Scrolls Online. And like MMOs in general.
Enemy spotted. A.
Take hold. One enemy remaining.
And I don't really like doing like the grinding for nothing, so I guess it kind of fits. Also, this is again, as long as the game can possibly be. Why does this keep happening? 12-12.
Sudden death.
We're here because we're the best. Don't any of you forget that.
They're so rude. Gonna go around that way, I think.
Breathe deep.
Oh god. Oh god, that's a lot of them over there.
Toxins going up.
How did they get me? I put up a big wall and they couldn't see me and they still got me. When I fire into the mist, I always miss. I said I'm gonna put little, instead of a numbered score,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put little faces on each of them, and then you can map the faces, if that's possible. I guess you could do it with numbers, like, you know, 1 lowest, 5 highest, and I'll get little emojis or something. For all anime characters in different like states of distress. Anyway, we lost this game. We got to like 10 while they were on 4, and then we lost so many games after that.
Attackers win.
I don't know how to message to all, like to everyone. Cool. That game took, I shit you not. Except, thank you. That game took, I shit you not, 47 minutes.